Regulation of the digestive system. There are two levels of regulation in the digestive system. There are long reflexes, which involve the CNS, and short reflexes, which are localized nerve plexuses within the enteric nervous system. The long reflexes include the sympathetic and parasympathetic afferent neurons, firing through the brain and then routing back to the GI system. The short reflexes involve within the intestinal lumen. That revolves around the chemoreceptors, osmolar receptors, mechanical receptors, and the intestinal wall through the enteric nervous system, and then it triggers a change to the smooth muscle or gland and then responds. So there are two mechanisms of control in your GI. The local regulation of the digestive system by the enteric nervous system includes the types of enteric neurons. So we have sensory neurons, motor neurons, interneurons, and there's going to be a basal electrical rhythm that gets generated. This is induced by the enteric nervous system, and it's created by the action potentials of the interstitial cells of cajole. These are called the pacemaker cells. The cells of the cajole. The enteric nervous system regulates the local reflexes, and they relay signals from the CNS to keep it from any kind of damage. Let's start with the first one, the regulation of stomach secretions in the CNS by the cephalic phase. The cephalic phase involves a cephalic reflex, which is thought, smell, sight, or taste of food that begins to initiate the increase of the contractile force and the secretion of the juices in the stomach, as well as contractions of the pyloric sphincter. So when any of these triggers begin to hit the brain, it's going to cause signals through the sympathetic neurons to be inhibited, and then the activation of the parasympathetic vagus nerve to trigger the stomach to produce more stomach acid. So when you are relaxed, you will aid in digestion. The regulation of stomach secretions by the CNS, the gastric phase. The gastric phase begins when the food product or the bolus reaches the stomach and the gastric reflex is initiated. The gastric reflex is a nervous system reflex initiated when the food actually enters the stomach and the baroreceptors begin to sense the change in the stretching of the stomach wall. When the chemical receptors detect any traces of protein and an increase in the stomach pH, this begins to trigger more responses. These signals are sent to the brain, the medulla oblongata, and increases motility and more secretion of the gastric cells. So you can see right here, the vagal-vagal reflex involves the stomach being stretched because of food going in, triggers to the medulla of the brain, causing again the activation of the parasympathetic nervous system, turns off the sympathetic nervous system, and that will then cause the stomach acid to be secreted. Other compounds like peptides, caffeine, rising pH, and the local reflex inside your food will then stimulate gastrin and histamine, and that will then produce more stomach acid. If you have excessive stomach acid, or if you are emotionally upset and angry, those ones will inhibit these signals and it will reduce stomach acid as a result of turning off gastrin. Regulation of stomach secretion by the CNS, the intestinal phase. The intestinal phase in the peristalsis is when peristalsis or more prevalent movement occurs when substances have been digested or absorbed. The peristaltic waves begin in the duodenum and moves material about 2 feet before it begins to slow down. And then a new wave begins to form and pushes out. This pattern of contraction repeats itself. It involves also the peptides and amino acids being detected inside the small intestine of duodenum, and that will then produce more gastrin. That will stimulate the stomach to make more acid. On the right-hand side, when there's dissension and fats or high osmolarity and irritants in the duodenum, that will then cause the secretion of certain kinds of stomach cells like secretin, GIP, CCK, and VIP, and these will then turn off stomach secretion. So on the right side, these compounds here all favor the inhibition of stomach acid, whereas gastrin, histamine, and acetylcholine favor the activation. Over here is a chart of some of the key hormones you should be aware of in the GI tract. Histamine is going to be released from the enterochromatin cells of the stomach. Its main release stimulus is going to be gastrin, and the receptor is going to be the parietal cells. Their main function is to produce acid. Gastrin is another hormone that's made by the G cells, and this is triggered by the gastric distension or stretching. Main receptors are located inside the stomach and pancreas, and again, its main function is to produce more stomach acid. On the other side, cholecystokinin, CCK, this is a hormone that's made by the duodenum endocrine cells, and its main trigger is by fat breakdown in the duodenum, and its receptor location is the pancreas, gallbladder, stomach, and it favors the bicarbonate and reduces the acidity, but it does favor releasing of enzyme. It actually inhibits the stomach acid. Secretin is another hormone that is also made by the duodenal endocrine cells, and this is triggered by the acid in the duodenum. The receptors are going to be the pancreas and stomach, and its main function is also to inhibit the acid. The last one is a gastric inhibitory peptide, GIP. This hormone is going to be released by duodenal endocrine cells. Its main release triggers are going to be lipid, glucose, and amino acids. And receptor location are the stomach, small intestine, pancreas. And again, it inhibits stomach acid. So the blue ones represents acid inhibitors, and the red ones represent acid activators. On this next slide, we have another set of hormones. Somatostatin is a hormone that's made by the D cells in the gastric pits, and its main trigger is that it has a continuous basal level release. Receptor location is going to be the parietal cells in the stomach. It also favors inhibition of stomach acid. And then we also have gastric releasing peptide called bombesin. This is a newer hormone that's also made by the digestive tract and the pancreas. And its main trigger is going to be with the food in the GI tract, and main receptors are located in the stomach, small intestine, pancreas. And because it favors CCK, it's going to favor a reduction of the acid. So we're going to go ahead and put a cross here. And then VIP, vasointestinal peptide, is a hormone that's made by the digestive smooth muscle and the mucosal membrane, also triggered by food in the tract, binds to smooth muscle, and its main function is to relax the smooth muscle. The last three hormones over here are going to trigger changes to your satiety. Enteroglucagon is a hormone that's going to be made by a small intestine. It binds to a receptor, and its main function is to inhibit the release of insulin. Ghrelin is a hormone that's made by the stomach and targets the brain and stimulates hunger. And leptin is going to be a hormone that's made by the adipose and fat, also targets the brain, but decreases hunger. So ghrelin is thought to be the craving-based hormone, whereas leptin is thought to be the fullness-based hormone.